Welcome to Make Your Money Matter with Brad Barrett, the show that aims to change the way you think about wealth management. Brad is a certified financial advisor, established radio host, and author of Retire Right. He is a managing director and partner at One Capital Management, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm managing over $4 billion for clients across the nation. Brad and his team are dedicated to helping clients protect and preserve their assets so they can reach their investment and retirement goals. And now, your host of Make Your Money Matter, Brad Barrett.
Welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management. Today on the show, I'm going to be talking about my conversation with my 93-year-old grandfather and his outlook, not only in terms of his history, what he's seen in 93 years, he'll be 94 in November, but also some of the concepts he has, and he's even taught me about money. I speak with him every week. We've been talking every week for years, most of my life, in fact, and I really hope and pray that all of you out there watching and listening have a relationship like this with a family member. He's one of my closest ones. I look up to him, and I want to share a lot of what we talk about weekly, and this week I actually had a conversation with him over the weekend, particularly around the subject matter I want to bring up today, which is money and legacy planning and discussions of how we view our daily lives in concert with our overall lifespan, the lifespan that God gives us here on earth. But before we get started, make sure to go to our website at onecapital.com. There you can download and subscribe to our podcast. You can also go to any other platform, whether it's Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud. Make sure to download and subscribe to the podcast. And friends, I'm praying and hoping that each of you leave a comment, some feedback. It's always good. Hopefully about this one, because I'll be honest with you. This one's a little bit vulnerable for me. This is a conversation, a private conversation, quite frankly, that I have weekly, like I said, with my grandfather. My kids, I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, Brooks and Kate. They know him as Gigi Pa. They're great grandkids. We talk weekly. My 5-year-old Kate is very fascinated that he's 93 years old, even to the point where she even goes, "Dad, he's still alive. That's amazing." And the way she says it, and even when he hears it, we just all laugh. He's very open about it. In fact, my conversation with him that I'm going to bring up today, he even said, "Well, say hi to the grandkiddos for me from Gigi Pa and let them know I'm still here." So we have a very open relationship. And I talk with him about life. I talk with him about money. I talk with him about business. He's just an amazing man that I want to share some things. And I started off the conversation I had with him with a very simple question. What is different about money to you now that you are 93 versus when you were 18? Now, quick aside, this idea I had about this show this week actually came over the weekend from a topic I had last week that I mentioned around a review meeting I had with a current client. She was in her 80s, and I was sharing that most of our conversation really had little to do with money or the investments or the growth or things like that. It really had more to do with her values and interests, like her kids, her grandkids, her hobbies. It transitioned from our working together in her 60s to her 80s, where now we've gotten to this stage where we're growing it. We've earned it. We've gone through the, what I call high risk, low probability years, the things that we're all thinking about right now that I'm even talking to you today on, right? Around, I got to grow money, I got to protect money. I'm growing a family, raising a family, putting kids through school. We're in those 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, maybe even 70s right now. And we're still in that accumulation phase. So I asked this question of my grandfather, and I call him Pa John. So I asked Pa John, again, what's the difference between money for you now at 93 versus 18? And this is his response. And now it might give you some background here a little bit here for a second, but his response is this. "Well, Brad, at 18, I didn't have enough money to think about money. When he was 18, he enlisted in the Army and was making $75 a month as a GI. This was exactly what he had said. And what was interesting about that was right on the heels of that comment was when he said, at 18, I didn't have enough money to even think about money, so it didn't really matter to me. But he said this, all I know is this, I may not have had money, but I had everything I needed. So my grandfather was born in upstate New York. He is one of like 8 boys. So typical, turn of the century American family. They worked on a farm. When he was born in 1929, he enlisted in the Army in 1946. Now, anyone knows their U.S. history. Obviously, World War I and 41. It was over by the time he was there, and he was actually stationed in Japan. He was in the Army for about 6 years. And what's interesting about this when he was talking about it was, when he actually got deployed to the Korean War in 1950, he was going, Bradley, it's interesting because if you look at it, there was a peace treaty signed. So the Korean War technically never ended. Now, I didn't know this. I looked it up and it's totally true. Kind of interesting, right? And he also said, my 6 years in the military, in the Army, was actually lost because in 1973, the Defense Agency had a fire and lost a lot of guys' records. I mean, again, I share this simply to note that when I was talking with him, and I've known a lot of the history from him, I'm very fascinated, in his background. And I think any of us out there, and I'm sharing this simply today, is say, look, we have a generation right now, and I would argue the greatest generation of our time, that is getting in their years where God's going to call them back up. So more than anything, before I go forward, spend time and talk with an 80-year-old, a 90-year-old. Talk with someone born in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. It's amazing what is revealed, both about their life as well as how you relate it to yours. I'm digressing a little bit, but it's really important. Now, when he was stationed there for 6 years in Japan, deployed to the Korean War, spent some time there, then was actually resent over to Japan, where he married my grandmother, and actually that's where my dad was born. My dad was born in Yokohama, Japan, and he had terrible asthma. Now, if you look at history, they actually called it the Japan air, the Yokohama asthma effect. And they were telling him, the doctors, they were telling me, you have to move. So we put in for reassignment around 1957, 58. My dad was born in 1955. And actually the reassignment was New Mexico. And my grandfather was like, I don't even know where that is. I mean, remember, he went from upstate New York literally to across the world, like many people did in this generation, right? To go serve and protect this great country of ours. I'll get into that a little bit later. But what's interesting about that, he goes, I don't even know where that is on a map. And at that time, he was talking to a colonel who he had been working really hard for. And as he was entering and leaving the military after 6 years, I should say, that's when he ended up becoming a civilian. And a civilian, he actually got a governmental contract as a civilian, and he worked for the government for 35 years. He was essentially a civil engineer in the sense of logistics. And I'll get into his story a little bit later because it's fascinating how it relates to some money, raising families in context. Again, from someone who's been through a lot of decades. And I'm sharing this simply to say for anyone out there, again, this is a little bit about money, but a lot more about life. And I thought a lot about my concept last week about this conversation. And believe it or not, some of the comments I got was actually negative. They were saying, yeah, right, Brad, there's no way that lady you were talking to didn't care about money. And I'm like, no, it is. And if you have had a conversation like I've had for nearly 20 years with clients who've gotten older in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, I promise you, and you will be there too. If you're listening here in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, you can fathom and realize that at some point, money becomes less of a stressor to you and more of a comfort to you. Now, we're in the years, most of us right now, and I talk about this a lot on our show, that we need to accumulate. We're in the growth phase. He was the same way. He talked about this. There was nothing wrong with it at all. But at some point, you also want to be able to look at your wife someday, look at your spouse at some point, and be like, hey, we've had enough. Let's enjoy. This is where I bring up the concept of living life out of abundance versus scarcity. So his redeployment went from New Mexico to talking with his colonel, who he ended up getting a contract job in Hawaii. My dad was then raised in Hawaii. My auntie was born there as well. And so they were raised in Hawaii, and he lived there for 35 years. Many of you know my story. I moved there for a little while as well. I've always had a close tie to the island. So my family and I were always there. We have a lot of family there. So, that's where we were raised. And so it was very interesting to kind of look at these concepts. And it brought up a question in my conversation with him that went from, again, his view of money between 18 and 93. He answered it very simply, just to restate, that I didn't have enough money at 18 to even think about it. I think for anyone listening right now, a lot of us have been there before. When you don't have it, you don't really think about it. And then you get to the concept of all of a sudden you start having it and then you start stressing more about it. Anyone else been through that? I know I have. The whole idea of the more you have to fall concept. It's crazy. And you've heard me say this concept before, but I've I've kind of gleaned this through conversations with someone I respect, like my grandfather. We talk weekly, also with my ability and my purposeful, driven environment of working with people for 20 years in the financial services and just in finances in general. And I've said this a lot, that when a decision is to be made and it's should you versus could you, they're very different. Here's what I mean by that. Take my grandfather, 18 years old, didn't have a money or anything, didn't have a pot to piss in, as they say, right? It's a really simple question if you were to come up with, hey, let's go on vacation, as an example. Something we talk about all the time. We have a luxury in this world because of men like my grandfather and because of grandfathers out there like many of you listening. We owe a lot to this generation. But my point is this. It's very simple for him to say, no, it's not even a thought. There's no thought after it because he couldn't. It wasn't even an option. Now, what I mean, when all of a sudden you start growing and having assets and have means, now all of a sudden it's like, well, we could. And then we start talking about, should we? See what I'm saying? The stress that we bring on in our lives when it comes to money has a lot to do, if you think about it, with the question and how we start that question. Should you versus could you? Any one of us right now could think of a time period in our life where we were working paycheck to paycheck. Frankly, we were in debt. I know I've been there. I've shared my story a couple times. And it's really simple when a buddy says, hey, let's go out to dinner. And it's like, look, man, I don't have the money. So it's a very simple no. I don't stress about it. I'm not thinking twice about it. That's the answer. Versus, I have the money. I was thinking about going out the next night, but I could probably do tonight. And then all of a sudden you get into this like worrisome, stressful, anxiety-ridden environment. We've all gone through this trap. So my speaking weekly here on our show and with our clients is a lot about the psychology and the mindset of how we view money versus money itself.
Stay connected. Get frequent updates on the show. Follow Brad Barrett and Make Your Money Matter on most social media platforms. And catch full episodes of Make Your Money Matter streaming now on our YouTube channel. To schedule your no-obligation appointment, go to onecapital.com or call 805-410-5454.
So my next question to him kind of came up organically in our conversation, around what would you tell a younger person today? I mentioned the comment of what would you tell a 25-year-old, but the reality was anyone under the age of 40, in my mind, was something I would want someone who doesn't have a grandfather like mine that I get to talk to weekly, and I'm very blessed for that. What would you tell that person? This was his answer. He goes, Brad, it's hard to say in this world. Actually, he calls me Bradley, so I'll go more formal. Bradley, it's hard to say in today's world, but I'll say this. Take a job and do the best you can. And make it matter, make it count. Work those hours, don't look over the fence. These are all words from him. And then I started asking about his career a little bit more. And he goes, when I look back on my 35 years as a civilian contractor in logistics for the military, and then my 6 years in the military, there were decades sometimes where I was working and I would never get promoted. But you know what, by the way, I should share something right now. My grandfather is debt-free, has a lot of assets in the bank, not because he's driving Ferraris or living in mansions. No. He's doing it because he built his own little empire, whatever that number means. I've shared this a lot. In fact, weekly, I just spoke about this whole thing about, rich versus wealthy and the difference in those two words and the vernacular behind them. I've always said this, it has a lot to do with where you put the zeros. And in his world, he has zero regrets. He worked hard, he raised a family, he lived in areas he wanted to live in. But he kept his head down. And I know many of us have had this conversation with people, and we know this from a lot of our generational, but like nowadays more than ever, if you're listening here in particular, and you're under the age of 30 in particular, I want to be very clear about this. You have more noise around you than that generation did. I told my grandfather this, and he said, I totally agree. The noise we have from social media, the noise we have from media outlets in general, and really the culture nowadays is kind of looking over the fence. The grass is greener. And I mentioned this comment to my grandfather, and this was his comment. He goes, Bradley, the grass is always greener where you mow it. Now, mind you, this guy's routine, 93 years old, by the way, his routine is to get up. It takes him a couple hours to get going, all right? And then he goes out and does his lawn every day. I call him sometimes. I call my grandmother and say, hey, Mimi, is Pa John there? He goes, yeah, he's out in the yard. Let me go get him. He's 93. And I joke with him and I'm like, Pa John, what are you doing, man? He goes, a rolling stone carries no moss. Friends, we are going to miss this generation. We are. I'm going to say it here loud and clear. So find those loved ones, talk to them, ask them their story. It's fascinating And I was asking him a little bit more about this, and I kind of went through and said, well, what would you tell someone? What would be further more about money and just kind of, particularly a man, because I was talking to my grandfather, and what would you tell a man right now for his family and for his spouse? He goes, I don't think anywhere in this country we've ever been given so much than we are today. Back in my day, we weren't given anything. You had to work for it. You had to earn it. Now, because of that, we created a very generational wealth approach. We're seeing that. In fact, in our business, we talk about it a lot. The largest generational shift in wealth is about to happen, and it's currently happening over the next 5, 10, 15 years. This generation that is going to be passing on and leaving this wealth to the next generation who likely, sadly, psychology speaking, who hasn't quote unquote earned it, might squander it. This, to me, friends, is something I speak about heavily, and I've actually said in my 20 years now being a financial advisor, my next 20 years, I'm very purposeful on this. That's the reason for the show, even I started a couple years ago, was to talk to you guys about this. When you receive these dollars, I promise you, it's something that it hits different. You know what I mean? It's not something you earned, it's something you were given, and that's fine. That's a blessing. That's what the generation wants it to be, but we need to treat it a little bit differently, right? Because we look at money that we earn differently than what we've been given. Wouldn't you agree? And again, not right or wrong, just a probably factual statement. Granted, it's likely my opinion as well. But I love talking with him every week, and I wanted to share this week's. And again, like I mentioned, it's not necessarily something that is directly about money, psychology, money, investing, taxes, a lot of stuff that we talk about here. But I wanted to take a moment, take a week even, and just share that we're coming up here on Memorial Day. And again, I know I'm blessed to be able to talk to my grandfather every week. And knowing his background, I would just share, reach out to this generation, talk with them, spend time with them. And you know what? It's crazy. It's not necessarily even for them. It's for you. It's amazing what I've realized. And I took some stock in it. I was praying on it last week, and I realized, there's a lot of knowledge I've gotten from him just being my grandfather and just him talking through things with me. It's just amazing to me. And I want that for everybody. And so I wanted to share today's conversation I had with him just yesterday. And it was one of those just great half-hour conversations. Again, a 93-year-old. And every time I talk about some of these events in his life, it's clear as day. I mean, there's no mumbling, there's no nothing. It is very clear. And his mind is so sharp. And it's unbelievable to see, as I know there's a lot of things going on nowadays that, we get jumbled and we have just too much going on and we can't even think of, what we did last night or what we ate last night. And here's this 93-year-old telling me what happened in 1947. I mean, it baffles me sometimes. The other day, someone was asking me what, on Monday, what we did over the weekend, and my wife and I with the kids, we had so much going on. It literally took me 30 seconds to remember what we did. Yet alone my 93-year-old's telling me what happened in 1978, when Carter made the decision to terminate a relationship with Taiwan. His job, my grandfather's job, was being in Taiwan, and he made this decision, Carter did, in December of 78, and they said by April 10th, they had to be out of Taiwan. So for January 5th until then, my grandfather was there moving and getting things in and out of Taiwan. That was his job. Now, at the same time, he was telling me too that they also had a defense treaty still in place with Taiwan. So we had to keep what's called WRMs there, so war-ready material. So he was there all throughout the year. And he was telling me a funny story that he had a passport that he had left Indonesia into Taiwan, but he had one official and one unofficial passport. And the way it went down was they showed him leaving Indonesia, but never arriving anywhere else. Anyways, he got caught up in Taiwan. It took him about 5 hours for the U.S. Defense Department to be able to let them know that he is legit and he was coming in. And it was one of those funny stories that, we just don't have those stories anymore. Those are the kind of stories that will get lost generationally. And again, the way he was saying it was just clear as day. And so I'm sharing this a lot to say that for someone right now listening, there's a lot on your mind. We're talking about 2023. We just finished tax season. You got political craziness going on. We got a budget conversation happening as we speak. These are economic events that we call black swan events. And there's studies left and right. There's about 200 of them every year. I've talked about this many times before. It can be as simple as somebody said something weird, like the CEO of a company said something wrong or whatever, to a budget conversation and anywhere in between, right? So all I'm trying to say always is what my grandfather told me years ago. Keep your head down, do good work, do right by people, and you will be fine. Now, what's interesting about those comments that I've always gleaned to was that the color that kind of goes in the black and white lines of those statements has a lot to do with what we discuss and think about daily in our own lives. I'm speaking to my wife and I as well. We're raising kids like many of you. We're talking about, raising them in the right environments, and obviously, as we all know as parents, there's no instruction manual. We daily, I'm wondering if I'm doing a good job or not, and, we're also talking about money and savings and debt repayments and mortgages and everything you guys are talking about just the same. My grandfather always said, keep your side of the street clean, do unto others as you would do unto you, very biblical, and you're going to be fine. And so as simple as that may sound, that's what I want to go into this week with. It was on my heart. That's what I want to focus on this week. I don't even know what I'm going to title this week's episode, but it's probably going to be a conversation with a 93-year-old. Listen up. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But I wanted to share that, however many years I have left with this wonderful man that I've been blessed to call my grandfather, I'm going to spend as much time with him as possible, talking with him. He calls me every time after he listens to my podcast. He might be, for all I know, he might be the only person listening to this podcast. And so, Paul John, if you are listening, thank you for all of our conversations. And thank you for the phone call I'm probably going to receive in 20 minutes after you listen to it, because he calls me every week and I love it. I love hearing what he likes and doesn't like. It's always good feedback. And like I asked from you guys, just the same. So whoever you are and wherever you are, whatever stage in life you are in, I highly recommend talking to someone who's been there before. It's amazing. We talk about mentors, we talk about with a family or a colleague, a friend, doesn't really matter, but someone who's been through something before, maybe even a decade or two above you, they've seen different generational things in our country. They've seen different environments within their family structure that might be similar to yours. I would just, discuss with you, spend some time with them, give them a call. Say you're thinking about them, and it's amazing, believe it or not, what you'll receive. It's not so much for them, like I said before, it's more what you'll receive. And so, back to my grandfather's statement about what he would, his money difference between 18 and now at 93, he's turning 94 in November. He goes, at 18, I didn't have anything to think about because I didn't have any money, but I had everything I needed. So that's what I want to end the show on. We talk about money all the time on this show. We talk about savings, we talk about investing, we talk about taxes, we talk about all those kind of things. And they matter, don't get me wrong. He even said so too. They matter because at times you want to say when you do receive money, you want to know what to do with it. That's where an advisor comes in. Okay, same thing with talking with someone who's been there before. Talk with an advisor, meet with them, because likely they have experience to help you navigate, these potholes out there that you might not even know exist, quite frankly. And so I'm a big advocate of that, as you all know, but I want to put a bow on this today and say, think about it. Do you have everything you need? Are you healthy? Thank God for that. Do you have a roof over your head? Thank God for that. Do you have a job? Thank God for that. It's amazing when we start doing that, even a simple 30 seconds. It's amazing how it can actually stress-free our day. So again, this is Brad kind of talking with a conversation with my grandfather. It was on my heart this week and I wanted to share it to you. And I just really employ, and I love each of you. I really, really do. I care about this show. I care about what I do as an advisor. And I love the conversations I get to have. And that's one of the reasons for this platform. I want to share those conversations to the best of my abilities and what others are thinking in different generations so that we can all gather something from the knowledge that we're able to glean from a podcast, from an advisor, from a friend, a colleague, a family member, whatever it might be. I want to thank you for listening to the Make Your Money Matter show. As always, before acting on anything discussed today, speak with a financial advisor near you about your specific situation. Or again, if you'd like our help, you can reach us at 805-410-5454. And until next week, always remember, make your money matter.
The information in this show is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration a listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.